Yandra Vinaka, and welcome to the brunch. I'm Lusi Banuve.
And I'm Ilaitia Ravuwai. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Coming up on the show, we're having an important conversation about Fiji's growing HIV crisis. Joining us live from Nandi is Dr. Jason Mitchell, head of Fiji's HIV Taskforce.
Now, Fiji recorded 2016 new HIV cases in 2025 alone. Now, Dr. Mitchell will take us through the numbers, what's driving the increase, and what is being done to respond.
Later in the show, we're switching gears and celebrating Fijian creativity and digital storytelling.
Joining us from Nandi is digital content creator Losana Tavo-Kenawai, the creator behind the popular TikTok Sana.
But first, a quick look at the news headlines this morning.
Today's major headlines on MaiTV's website. PM says that he does not accept last Friday High Court ruling that quashed the CO findings and recommendations. He says he will appeal parts of the judgment that directly affects or refers to him. He will also take it to the Supreme Court if necessary. Again, the Prime Minister says if his legal challenges fails, he will resign as Prime Minister. Also, MaiTV spoke with the Prime Minister during Parliament break yesterday, and this is what he had to say. So some would say this is a wind chart on your part because this is the second judicial review that you've lost that's been taken to court. Your thoughts on that matter?
No, we will have to pursue every avenue available to straighten out what we feel is not straight.
Some has also questioned the legal advice that's been given to you. Would you be able to clarify legal advices that's coming to you and the president himself? Who is giving those advices?
Well, before or after the coronavirus?
Both.
No, I have my party advisor, who is also my personal advisor, and also the Solicitor General and the Attorney General at the time. The Mulunga Valentamua has always been my personal counsel. I'm appealing the part that imply my activities and that touch on my name and what I had done, not on the whole thing. That depends on what my lawyers will tell me. As I'm not the author of the COI, I made the recommendation, and it's up to Attorney General when he advises me and Solicitor General. On my personal side, my legal counsel is doing.
If this if this appeal doesn't go through, you will resign,
Correct.
Mr. Prime Minister?
If that it goes up to the Court of Appeal. This is only High Court. We go to the Court of Appeal. And from the Court of Appeal, if I'm not happy with that, then I go to the Supreme Court. And that is the end.
We apologize for that technical issue. But now, turning to the newspapers, the Fiji Sun also has the PM's appeal with a headline, PM to pay his own appeal.
Mm-hmm. Also in the Fiji Sun, it focuses on the High Court judgment itself. Its headlines read, Judge talks about bias, highlighting the Justice Twingerengere, reference to the crocodiles in the pond. To help us break down is Fiji Times editor, Fred Wesley.
Bula, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Wesley.
Fred, thank you for joining us on the brunch, like Ilaitia said. But looking at your headlines today, looking at the papers, there's a lot of talk about the CIA and what the PM has said. Talk to us about your front page today, and apart from that, what are some of the key stories that the newsroom has been following?
Well, again, thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Lai. This obviously has been a very, very big story, and the reason is because of the amount of money spent on this. And there's already been an appeal, and now the latest we hearing now is the Prime Minister, Siti Rambuka, is considering another appeal, and but then this time it's not going to be on the whole COI. He says it's basically to do with the things that are against him or have an impact on him. But yes, we did go through the lengthy and comprehensive Commission of Inquiry report, and there were a couple of things that were within the content, and one of it was this, where Justice Tuingerengeri refers to crocodiles in the pond, and he also talks about bias. He's I'll need to be specific there, but to be specific, I need to get back into what he actually said, and see really what the High Court judge said was, there was a reference to repeated references to something about finding crocodiles in the pond, and he's talking about bias, and that for us was a big issue last night. We also covered something about Barbara Mali in yesterday's edition, but it went on page 7. But again, as I said, big news, pretty big news. This one is, and obviously the other big news was that yellow card for the minister, a member of parliament. Know who it was, Charanjit Singh, and for a couple of things that he said in the House. We also covered the big time the stuff on the developments on HIV. I've said this a couple of times. We can sound like a broken record on permanent replay mode when we talk about HIV, but then the consequences for us not taking action is quite scary. So that's the reason we are still keeping a tab on this, and I suppose it's also a role that mainstream media must play. You have all sorts of little videos, all sorts of things that will trend on social media, on the social media portals, on TikTok and all of that. But it doesn't take away the fact that as a country, as a nation, we need to be united in assisting the governance of our country, and for people to be able to do that effectively and appropriately, they need to be aware of what's happening around them. And again, as I alluded to earlier, a pretty big story, this HIV story, and it's something that the Fiji Times has been keeping a tab on, and we're very, very thankful that a lot of urgency has been placed on it. And like today, the big story today is the involvement of the Vanua. The ministry is now trying to involve the Vanua and all leaders of the Vanua, and as I suppose again, that's a big positive move forward.
Thank you, Fred. Time has caught up with us this morning. We thank you for joining us on the brunch.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me, Lusi and Lai.
Lai, he talked there about sometimes we're just taking, it's become like a broken record, and I think that's quite true, and maybe that's something that Dr. Jason will talk to us about.
Yeah. And one of our biggest stories in the last 6 months is the legal battle involving citizen journalist and author Charlie Charters.
That's right, and joining us now is Charlie from the UK. Charlie, welcome to the brunch.
Hello, everybody.
Good morning, Charlie. The High Court has ordered the immediate return of your 7 electronic devices following the permanent stay of your case. Now, looking back in the past 6 months, what has been the hardest part of this experience for you?
The hardest part, to be honest with you, has been just the sheer uncertainty of the various kind of points in this process that I've had to deal with. I didn't imagine that I was ever going to appear in dock, actually as the charged person. And when we were applying for our bail variation on March the 4th, to be sitting in the dock, not having really any clue whether or not the bail variation was going to be granted so that I could leave to continue my work in Australia, just appearing in the dock as an accused person is not something that my life, up to this point had prepared me for. And it was really a very sort of profound experience, because you realize that you really are in the hands of Lady Justice, and you just don't know which way those scales of justice are going to tip. I mean, I obviously pled not guilty, and was very confident in the fact that I had nothing even to apologize for, let alone be convicted for. But you just never know when you're in that court environment. And that was a very chilling experience.
And beyond the legal battle, there's always the family pays the price of everything that we go through. What has this ordeal cost you personally and professionally?
Well, I'm just going to kind of pause answering the cost to me professionally, because there is a process that's going on at the moment. We're waiting to understand if FICAC will appeal the permanent stay application. In many ways, I'm very fortunate to have the family that I have, because my wife and our kids all went through a version of this with the prosecution of my late mother-in-law, Dr. Mary Samasoni. And she was charged in January 2013, and it was almost 5 years later that eventually the Director of Public Prosecutions, Christopher Pride, came to court and conceded a nolli prosequi. So to some extent, this is a process that my wife and my family and friends are aware of, that you can be put through this excruciating legal pain with no case to answer. So from that point of view, it's been okay. It's like I've had a dress rehearsal, and this is the version of the theatre that applies to me.
Charlie, you described this rule as a major win in journalism. What are some of the lessons learned, and what does the ruling mean for journalists and whistleblowers in Fiji?
Well, I think one of the tricky things that we're beginning to understand a little bit more clearly is how much the 16 years under Bainimarama has cost Fiji. There are so many aspects of our work that the kind of muscle memory that we had as a country leading into 2006, which we have just lost through the particular style in which Bainimarama chose to kind of run Fiji. So we've got a media that is now enjoying a considerably larger degree of freedom, but is still really kind of exploring the boundaries of those freedoms, because under the media decrees and the PER regulations that were brought in the late 2000s, there was understandably an instinct to self-censor. And what we're seeing now is Fiji emerge into a degree of kind of a more open media dialogue and a more open civic society space. And those boundaries are still being rewritten, are still being tested. And it just happened to be that I was the individual that was the person that was basically the test case. But it could easily have been you. It could have been somebody from Fred's newsroom, that had a very important story to tell, that for whatever reason, one of the law enforcement agencies wanted to kind of jump all over us. It could have been the Fiji Sports Council story. Who knows what it might have been? It just happened to be something that kind of fell on me.
Much for joining us, Charlie. I'm sorry, time seems to have caught up with us, but thank you so much for joining us on the brunch today, and have a good night. Welcome back to the brunch.
Now to discuss, as we spoke earlier, we are turning our attention to the most urgent public health issue facing Fiji. the sharp increase in HIV cases.
Fiji recorded more than 2,000 cases in 2025, bringing renewed focus on how the country is responding to this.
To help us understand the numbers and what is driving the increase and what is being done about it, we are joined live from Nandi by Dr. Jason Mitchell, who is the head of Fiji's HIV Taskforce. Dr. Mitchell, Yandravinaka, and welcome to the brunch.
Dr. Mitchell, let's start with the numbers. 2016 cases in 2025. Can you put those numbers in context for us? How did we get here and what does this mean?
Thank you, Lucy. I think in terms of how we got here, it's clear that there's been a change in the type of epidemic that Fiji has been experiencing in the last 5 years or so. HIV is often driven by certain risky behavior. And historically, our risky behavior has always been high-risk sexual behavior. So for us, basically, it's unprotected sexual intercourse, both between males and also males and females. That has always been our traditional mode of transmission. But in the last 5 years or so, as you all know, we've had an increase of a drug use problem here in the country. What drugs in itself does not lead to HIV. I think it's important for us to understand that it's the risky behavior associated with drug use that is where we have problems. And for us here in Fiji, it's injecting drug use is quite common amongst people who use drugs. That leads to risky behavior because there isn't an active needle and syringe program here in the country. A needle and syringe program is essential to an overall harm reduction program. And as a result of the absence of a needle and syringe programs, the sharing of needles and syringes among people who inject drugs is really, really high. And it's an effective way in which infections can transmit very effectively between people who are sharing needles and syringes. What is unique about the way we inject drugs here in Fiji is that people share, and we share drugs, and we of course share our injecting equipment. And as a result of that, our infections are really expanding very rapidly. What's concerning for us is the infections have spread from our usual traditional groups. And as I said, our traditional mode of transmission here is heterosexual, and it's really sexual transmission. But it's now expanding beyond our traditional groups and into other population groups in the country. And that's why we have the type of epidemic we're currently experiencing.
Dr. Mitchell, thank you. In one of the reports that I read earlier that was released by the Ministry of Health, it says that the Central Division is accounting for about 2/3 of the new diagnoses. Speak to that a little bit, Dr. Mitchell.
Yeah, not gonna lie. Yeah, that's a good. You've caught a very good statistic there. Historically, the majority of infections has been in the Central Division. If you know anything about the population distribution, Central Division just has one of the largest populations in the country. It is the center of economics and commerce, and so of course there's a shift of people from villages and from other parts of the country to Suva. So of course it just makes sense that the concentration of people who are infected with HIV would be in Suva. There's nothing particularly unique that is happening in Suva as far as we can tell that explains why there's the majority of infections here. We think a lot of it has to do really with the density of the population here. So of course the numbers are much higher in the Central Division. I think we should not be distracted by this. It is important for us to understand that we have HIV cases being diagnosed right across the country. Traditionally, small islands that are outside of the Central Division or Vitilevu, Vanuatu are typically protected because it's the islands so far away from the main islands. But we are very mobile population, so we are now experiencing cases being diagnosed in other parts of the country that traditionally would not have seen cases.
So there were some alarming statistics too of mother to child, pediatric cases. Could you just speak on this particular issue?
I'm going to start off maybe deviating a little bit from the statistics and talk about what is possible. First of all, the fact that we're having children born with HIV is a serious concern for the country, and everyone should be sitting up if you have any one child who is being diagnosed with HIV, because all of this is preventable. And for us, this is a disaster it's a disaster within a disaster. Mother to child transmissions actually, the way to see this is parent-to-child transmissions, because explains that a lot of infections are happening between parents of these children. And so what's happening is that all of this is preventable because treatment is available. If women have treatment, they are not able to transmit their infections to their babies. But what's happening is a lot of women are being missed in the antenatal setting, and so therefore they're being diagnosed at a later time. So oftentimes if they're tested early in their pregnancy, the HIV test will come back negative. So there's of course no need for treatment. But later on in the pregnancy, they may become infected, or they seroconvert, or which means the HIV test would become positive later. So what we're having to do now in the ANC setting is to introduce multiple testing rather than one testing, which is the usual way that we used to do it. So we want to have a minimum of 2 or upwards of 3 testing for any woman who is pregnant, so that we can avoid onwards transmission from mothers to babies.
Just leading on from that, the whole thing around not wanting to go for testing. What is one thing apart from stigma? What has the ministry seen that keeps people from getting treatment, from even going to find out if they do have HIV?
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. I think one of the things that is, I think it's important for us to appreciate is that because the epidemic was so tiny in the past, we only had 3 HIV clinics in the country. And as we had increasing case numbers in the recent years, we have accessibility issues, which means that it's very difficult for people to access clinical services because we only had 3 clinics. In response to this, we have decentralized and integrated HIV clinics into our subdivisional hospitals, which means right now there are 15 subdivisional hospitals in the country that can actually diagnose and treat people for HIV. So in terms of, in addition to stigma and discrimination, accessibility has always been an issue, and the ministry is working very hard to address this. We as human beings like choice. Not everyone wants to come to a government facility. Most people in the country are used to going to government services, but we need to make sure that there are other options available to us. Right now, we're looking towards medical services specific, and also perhaps the private GPs who are scattered around the country. This gives us other options for where people who may want to seek out other services that isn't being given by government. So for us, this is the focus of the task force responsibilities.
Dr. Jason, just before we go to the break, why are some young people, particularly between the ages of 20 and 24, being affected at such a high rate?
I think it's important, this is not new information for us. Young people typically have higher risk behavior because they're just becoming adults, and they typically get involved in lots of risky behavior. I think what is happening right now is the new risk behavior amongst our younger population is the high risk behavior associated with drug use or injecting drug use. And so for us, this is where I think a lot of the infections are coming about in this young population group. And of course, the traditional means of transmission of HIV is sexual transmission. We still have the risky behavior of inconsistent condom use in our population. And so this is another way in which young people are at risk of HIV transmission. The third way for us is the high rates of untreated sexually transmitted infections. We have a serious problem in the Pacific where we have untreated STIs. Untreated STIs make it easier for us to become infected with HIV through sexual transmission. So if you have the combination of low condom use and untreated STIs in our population, this means it's very easy for people to become infected with STIs. And this is something that we need to attend to very urgently, because it's driving with the high rates of STIs in this particular age group.
Thank you so much for that first segment, Dr. Jason. And we'll be back shortly after this break to continue the discussions once again.
Welcome back to the brunch. Lucy, that was some pretty interesting conversations.
It's interesting and alarming. Alarming that in this day and age, even now, with the increase, people are still worried about what people will think of them over the fact that their life is being affected, that they could, it's just, some pretty alarming statistics from him.
To help us speak more on that, we still have Dr. Jason, who is joining us from Nandi. Dr. Jason, how significant is injecting drugs using how significant is injecting drug use in driving the current outbreak, and what is the government doing about it?
Nakalai, we rely very much on our clinical services to tell us what risky behavior our people who are engaged in care. So for us, we are basing a lot of our understanding of the current epidemic on this clinical knowledge, and 48% of the people that we have enrolled in care report that they're engaged in risky drug use behavior. So we have conducted a rapid assessment, or rather our colleagues from Kirby Institute conducted a rapid assessment on drug use here in the Central Division in February last year, 2025. And the rapid assessment identified that there's some high-risk behavior that our drug users are engaged with. I've already shared the sharing of needles and syringes, which means it becomes very effective for people to become infected with HIV through that mode of transmission. So the government has been working very hard to write the relevant regulations that are required in order for us to introduce an effective harm reduction program that includes a needle and syringe program. Needles and syringes are an evidence-based approach to reducing the rates of transmissions amongst drug users who are engaged in drug use. And that needle and syringe programs means that as a public health intervention, we put into the hands of drug users needles and syringes that are sterile, which means we recommend that they use it only on themselves to administer drugs when they're using drugs. This is in no means or in no ways government saying that it is okay to take drugs. That is not the case. Needle and syringe programs are a public health intervention that are purely introduced as a means of reducing infections amongst people who inject drugs. The ministry and government is also focused on rehabilitation programs, which is essential. It is also part of a harm reduction program. Anyone that engages with the needle and syringe programs will be promoted to go towards a rehabilitation program, which is a very big investment on the government side. As you know, there's been a lot of move nationally to have rehabilitation programs. But for those who are not in rehabilitation programs, we want to make sure that they have access to sterile needles and syringes so that they can not get infected with HIV and also hepatitis C, which is a new infection that we're really concerned about because it's rapidly rising in our population of people who inject drugs.
And half of the people that were, diagnosed last year also lost their lives last year. And, what does this say about late diagnosis and access to care?
As I've said, I no longer think accessibility to care is the issue here. When people are not engaged in care and they're not on treatment, what happens is their immune system shuts down and they become exposed to opportunistic infections and cancers that they would normally not have had if their immune system was fully functioning. We have a large group of people here in Fiji historically who have not enrolled in care, even though they may know or they may not know their HIV status. And as a result of that, they succumb to their opportunistic infections and cancers. And these are the ones who are, reflecting on the statistics you just shared with us. These are the ones who are succumbing to HIV. And for us, we need to really strengthen our treatment and care programs so people are retained in care. Retention in care is always challenging for any health issue, not just HIV. We need to create an environment in which people feel supported and cared for to be able to be retained in care. Many people who start on treatment in Fiji oftentimes drop out of treatment and care. That has always been the case over the last 30 years of our epidemic. And it's something that we have to constantly look at to make sure people are constantly supported to be retained in care. Retention in care is the absolute essential part of controlling an epidemic such as this because treatment is a form of prevention. Anyone that's on treatment and their viral load is suppressed will not have opportunistic infections and will not develop cancers associated with HIV. Also, they are prevented from transmitting HIV to somebody else through either sexual transmission or injecting drug use. So it's an important part of our program to make sure that treatment is rolled out and people are retained in treatment and care programs.
Because this has been constantly in the news and around discussions. Sometimes it may seem like we're fighting a losing battle. It may seem like that, but you're currently at a symposium, a gathering of health professionals and stakeholders discussing this very issue, Dr. Jason, in Nandi. Could you just talk to us about this?
Naka, so thank you for highlighting that this is the Pacific HIV Symposium. It's specific because it's about an opportunity to share with our Pacific neighbors and our Vuvale about the lessons learned from Fiji, how other countries in this region can learn from our experiences, also learn experiences from our Asian partners, from Australia and New Zealand, about what is possible to prevent other countries in this region from experiencing what Fiji is currently going through. We have had many opportunities in the last 5 to 10 years in which Fiji could have intervened in different ways to prevent us from having the type of epidemic that we're currently experiencing. So this is an opportunity for sharing of lessons, for reminding us about the science, for bringing communities to share their own experiences. And for us, communities are at the very central of our response. We often haven't done this very well in the past, and we're trying to correct all of that, because communities who are impacted and affected by HIV are central to our response. And this symposium here in Nandi, which is a gathering of 400 people from not only Fiji but across the Pacific, and also our people from around this region, including America, Australia, New Zealand, who are coming together in one place to share these experiences and for us to all learn and support each other, because this is a joint effort. There is no way in which governments can address HIV alone. Communities must be equal partners in this experience. Our technical partners, the UN family, our NGO partners, civil society organizations, all of us must be on the same page. And as you talked about, our Excellency, the President of Fiji, was here to open the symposium yesterday, and he reminded us about the central role of the Vanua, and also our faith-based organizations in the response. All of us must be shoulder to shoulder, working together to address this particular epidemic that we're currently experiencing. And I think the lesson for us to learn here is that HIV never goes away. We must always be looking at what is happening on the ground and making sure that our programs are changing as the epidemic changes. And that is a lesson learned from every country in the world. HIV never goes away, and our epidemic needs to be understood, and our programs need to be responsive to the epidemic that is happening on the ground.
Dr. Mitchell, when we last spoke at the Marriott during one of the symposiums that we had earlier, you had called for the government to specifically have a strategic plan, and part of that is budget support. We've just come out of budget announcements and into the new fiscal year. Is that something that you're seeing as part of the strategic plan and the budget support that you need?
Yeah, thanks, Lai. One of the challenges that we faced, I think it was well publicized about the government's incredible financial contribution and investment to the HIV response. You may know historically the programs around HIV would receive about 200,000 Fijian dollars every year for programmatic support. Based on our request to the government last year, we received overnight $10 million. That is a momentous increase in budget support from one government, which is the Fiji government. Unfortunately, because of the challenges we faced over the last year in utilizing that budget, the Fiji government had to make a very difficult decision to reduce that financial support to something that is more realistic about what we can actually achieve realistically, because the program itself is not able to mobilize rapidly enough an effective response to utilize such a huge amount of budget support. So we have had a more realistic budget realignment. We are satisfied with that for the moment because it is able to meet the needs for us right now. The government has never said that whatever money that you get, that is all you will get. So for us, if we are able to utilize whatever funding we have received in the next financial year, the budget support from the Ministry of Finance and the government of Fiji will come as we requested. And so for us, we're happy with that. And we look forward to scaling up our response in the next year.
Jason, just a final question from us. You've talked about funding, we've talked about statistics, we've talked about a couple of other things, pertaining to the fight against this. For you, as a doctor leading up to now leading this task force, how do you continue the journey? How do you continue going, knowing that so many lives depend on your leadership? You've got a team that work with you in this fight against HIV.
Yeah, thank you. That's a question I get asked a lot by colleagues who work with me and who can see the huge tasks before us. I think what keeps me going certainly is the responsibility, and that there are many people who aren't in positions that I have, positions of privilege, positions of power and authority, and I am acting on their behalf. Communities who are not empowered, people who are struggling and are not able to reach our services, people who don't feel like they can be seen in the response. And I'm just empowered by the wonderful people that I work with every day. And I think all of us are really shoulder to shoulder, recognizing that there are many people who rely on us to make sure that the response is effective and it reaches everyone in a timely fashion and it meets their needs, so that we can do this together as a country. I'm very confident that Fiji has all the makings of what is required to respond to this epidemic. We have addressed multiple infectious disease epidemics in our history, and we have all the makings of what is needed for us to respond to this particular epidemic. And I think all of us, plus you, the media, are equal partners in this response. And I really want to thank you for having me on the show today, because I can share what is happening here in Nandi this week. And say that as an outcome of this meeting, a lot of recommendations from this meeting will be tabled with the heads of health in Rarotonga next week. I will be there with our acting permanent secretary. She and I will be making a strong case for other leaders in this region in health to take the HIV situation in Fiji seriously, because whatever happens in Fiji will eventually impact other countries in this region. And I look forward to that opportunity next week.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, for your time this morning, and we appreciate the work that you continue to do in relation to HIV. Thank you.
Naka.
Those were some interesting facts and the alarming facts, rather, that Fiji's continuing to face.
And I pick up on, what Dr. Mitchell has explained, has everything we continuously being, told when we attend the events and everything. But one thing I picked up was when he said that next week they go to the heads of health meetings. And the bit that I picked out was that they take it seriously. Yeah, what does that say about us in the Pacific? Do we, is it something that just comes up, we discuss, we all get agitated about it, and then it slips, and then you forget it, it just becomes another problem? That's really the alarming bit for me.
Yeah.
How we just seem lax about it.
Yeah, serious questions need to be asked, and serious actions need to be taken in that front, Lusi.
Stay with us. Stay with us here on The Brunch. We'll be back after this short break.
Welcome back to The Brunch on MaiTV. Those were the videos from content creator Losana Tavo-Kenawai from Nandi, who goes by the TikTok handle Sana.
Bolivinaka Losana. Now, Take us back to the beginning. What inspired you to start creating content?
Okay. Good morning, Lucy, and good morning, Lai, and good morning, Fiji. I'll take it back to the journey. Firstly, thank you so much for having me on the show, giving me this wonderful opportunity to be part of this local content creator segment. I think it's such a beautiful initiative by the team to create a space that celebrates and highlights local creators, and I'm genuinely honored to be included.
Losana, I've always watched your TikTok videos. Are you with Gay this morning?
Mhm. Oh no, Lai, I got married. Hold on, I'll take journey. I never really set up to
Gay.
become a content creator. It
But
wasn't something I doing
Cutting.
for either gay or I. We never planned that. It started very naturally. Just her and I, we were just posting completely unedited, unfiltered, raw moments online. We were just laughing at our own jokes and being silly. But surprisingly, those little moments, they created a lot of traffic and exposure online. And uh, people started recognizing us out in public. They were waving at us. They were wanting to take pictures with us. The love was so overwhelming and so unreal. And people started connecting with our friendship and our personality. And that was really the beginning of my journey with social media. So shortly after, I got married and I moved to Nandi. This was a completely different phase of my life. It was a completely different chapter. I was moving from Miss to Mrs. So when I came here to Nandi, my father-in-law is a pastor, and him and my mother-in-law together, they specialize in character building. So our home is always filled with all walk of life. They come here for voice counseling. They come here for guidance, for support, and truly for direction. So they have this way of seeing people for who they are, and they encourage you to grow and be the best of yourself. So when I was here, there was a point like I want the whole TikTok shenanigans. I was moving into a new chapter, and really I didn't know how to merge the two worlds together because this is a new chapter for me. I was doing that when I was single, and I didn't know how to merge the two worlds together. And they told me, my in-laws, they said, hey, like you have a big following base. You have to keep making content. You have to allow your content to evolve with you. You have to honor your marriage, embrace this new chapter, and you have to show your followers your transition and your story. And so they gave me this wireless microphone along with the other little equipments. It was like a small gesture of support. And yeah, so from there, and then I learned how to do editing. I had to teach myself how to put 82 different videos together into one little video. I had to learn how to make the text pop on the screen. I had to learn how to vlog, and done, I wanted to be sure that I still kept the rawness and the humor people originally with. So now I create because I genuinely enjoy it. I document my day, I document my life, I document my story, my transition. I want people to take something away from my page. Every time they're on my page, I want them to see and hear whether it's a life lesson or an awareness or like a little story, or if you're there to laugh or even a crying session. I want it to be enjoyable and to be relatable. As long as you take something positive from my page, I feel like I've done my job. Thank you.
Thank you, Losana. Firstly, I must apologize for sounding wrong there. But if people were to find your account, what is your handle?
It's Losana, SANAA.
Okay. Yeah, but then back to what we're discussing, the Super 8 cricket. And so, our very own photographer, Josefa, is from Como.
That's right.
And so the day before, when they played in the semifinals against Kambara, and these two teams have been, they have met a couple of times before in the semifinals and in the finals. So, you have Frida, who has ties to Kambara, and then Josefa, who's from Como. His team was playing against Kambara, and so it was just funny and really lively to see the interactions between the two. But then on the final day on Saturday, the mother team won the Super 8 title. They took the trophy back with them after losing out after beating
That's right.
Como, much to Josefa's dismay. But that was a Super 8 cricket, and it was televised live. We had people saying that after a long time, then they had cricket televised live in Fiji, and it was through MaiTV. And right here is that a little video that was put together by Johnny and the production team, and this just shows. I mean, look at that top quality production. Always we see this with sports, with rugby, with soccer. But it's good to see cricket. It's good to see people come out during the week. Mostly there are only two teams from Suva, from mainland Vitilevu, which was Nandi and Suva. The rest, the 6 teams, were from Lao. And that just goes to show how this sport is something that they treasure. A lot of people make fun. They say, Sechi, no rugby and no...
Right.
But to them, like throughout the week, you heard them say, we don't really care about what people say.
Yeah.
This is our sport, and we play it. You can have your rugby and your soccer. Right. It was really good to just be part of that festivity.
Did you do other stuff
yes.
over the weekend?
Yes, of course. Like we did, we covered the deans. I mean, if you went to Maris, unfortunately your school didn't make it, but there's always next year. But we had put out on the news on Saturday and on Sunday, Suva Grammar defeated the very determined and strong side from Ra High School, 51-0. That was the semi-final that was held in Lautoka.
That's right.
And because there were 2 places that the semi-finals were held at, it was in Lautoka between Ra High School and Suva Grammar, and the other semi-final was at the HFC Bank Stadium here.
That's right.
And that was between Lelin Memorial School and Nasinu. And for that one, Lelin has pulled through, and they made Suva Grammar this Saturday at the National Stadium. But a team to look out for, the only team that's come from the north
I worry.
Let's not go there. I declare my interest. I am from the north and I am from the Konrove, but a good story that's come out is how the team from Navatu Secondary School,
That's right.
That's in the Natewa Bay, in the Konrove, they are the only team from the north. But get this, Lai, this is the first ever team from the north that has reached the Dean's final. And so this is in the under 19 grade. They defeated Queen Victoria School in the eliminations round, and they met Suva Grammar at the quarterfinals.
That's right.
And then they played RKS last week. They beat RKS, and now they're going to be meeting Lelin Memorial School again this Saturday. So we spoke to head coach Alipate Ravuwai yesterday because he brought the team on a tour of Parliament, and we spoke to him yesterday, and this is what he had to say.
No, mutani ngo anishim shibuni chimini naboli me ngolemai me ato me na vata vatango pamuta singrara na ni tu tos chomai elimination tu stavi kives vidana to ni gitora kavi na dins kota final tu stavi Suva Grammar semifinal tu stavi RKS ingo chawa na mata na final na sota ileli na visuritsa na verna ndani vitoni pamuta ni ndona ilili Virna Vito ni Rangoli Mivono, era Listal Mera Varotel Mera Latar Menacing Kilu, Savage Richted, Virna Village, Mutani Gitongo Genesis Levororo, ni Nana Women Stage Go, Sanganrevina Vito Oni, Verna Vesevich, and Vesevora, Verna Vulutini in about secondary school, Mutango history, Tunivingona, Sa Tuaro of another room, or Tunangaravana.
Now to our weekly poll questions. Last week we had asked, who will win the Deans this year?
And this week we are asking, what is the biggest challenge facing young Fijians today?
Let us know what you think. Let us know what you think by answering the poll questions that is pinned at the top of the MaiTV Facebook page.
Well, that is all that we have time for today. We hope that you've enjoyed the show, the conversations that have taken place with the various topics that we've discussed.
Thank you for joining us this morning for the brunch. I'm Ilaitia Ravuwai.
And I'm Lusi Banuve. Have a beautiful week.
Mode.